My name is Susan Roden, and I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico. My primary goal was to come to a space where I wasn't committed to any obligation and learn to advance with a medium that I hadn't been using and make mistakes, because this is how you learn. And it was a great environment for that. The biggest project was the desert sculpture. It was to record the natural environment around here, as well as respect to nature and the harshness of the weather conditions. When I was awarded and invited as a resident to come here, the desert is so unlike what I've been experiencing living in Albuquerque. It's a southwest landscape. However, being desert, I was unaware exactly what the conditions were here as far as the landscape and the fauna and the animals. So I wanted to research and create a project to honor this opportunity. And I started this project to make a sculpture to honor the desert and to recognize, even though it seems harsh, that it's very fragile out here because of weather conditions and animals and just the topography. So I researched and decided to create a wooden sculpture. It's triangular. Once it's installed and mounted with a cowl at the top, it'll probably peak around 6.5 feet. And I wanted to acknowledge the kind of environment here. So I researched and looked for the kind of animals in the landscape. And I was very curious about the palette. As an artist, I've always heard the desert is brown. And so the more I researched, I realized there were a lot of gold and ambers in the area, especially when the sun rises and the sun sets. Okay. The desert sculpture did take primarily the first week. So I strongly urge any artist residents to consider a 3-week residency. I'm primarily known as a pastelist, which has been my medium for over 3 decades. And my goal here was to take acrylics and play with it, learn to become adept with the medium, as well as stylizing and changing my concept of being a very representational and traditional artist, which is always reflected in my pastels. So I focused on little vignettes of the landscape at different times of the day. And you could see that the very beginning, the pieces that I started, such as this piece and this piece, are very representational. It's very tight. It's kind of reminiscent of how I execute a pastel. And so I did these in a traditional format to get a feel of the palette, handling a brush, where I've always been used to using a pastel stick. So I started with a traditional imagery, and this is all local scenery at different times of the day. This third piece here was during the first 2 days there were a high windstorm and sandstorm. So I really enjoyed that, for the palette was so much more somber and not highly contrasted as usually my pastels are, or these other two. This piece here, I sat in a doorway during another windstorm in the barn here, and I painted what I was looking at from the door. I did a plein air, and I limited my palette to like 4 colors. And after I executed that piece, I did this piece, which this is where I really wanted to develop. It's much more simplified. It's really focused on a palette, and the colors aren't true to color either of what I saw. For the scene I saw was more as this tonal range. So I wanted to develop that more. And from there I progressed on to this piece. And I really like this transition and really want to develop it more. I've wanted to make little sculptures using recyclable parts. I've had exhibits with it, and a lot of it combines toys, old toys that have been thrown away or discarded or at resale shops, and findings that when I walk I pick up, like the wooden neck around here, and this little plastic tubing was just thrown in a ditch. So I go periodically, well, really almost daily, on little walks, and I check the coloring of my environment, but I also look for findings. And years ago, I used to be an editorial artist, and I used to do 2- and 3-dimensional paper sculpture. So I really like that with my hands and forming elements and objects. So this is the piece that I usually would follow that typically I've made of recycled sculptures. But I wanted to make a piece. This little lady is all found objects in the desert here. Great. Seeing the butt heads out to the driveway. You see it this way and the other way. I really encourage people to do a minimum of 3 weeks. It takes you a week and a half to get the lay of the land, the feel, see the coloring of your environment with the different positions of the sun between the rising, midday, and the sunset. It's nice to come at the different times of the year to see the different kind of weather. And I was fortunate, even though it kind of kept me indoors, to experience the high winds and the sand just blowing around. It was very inspiring. So I highly encourage that, to come and see different times of the year.